Because of the American Rescue Plan and the actual Inflation Reduction Act that Democrats passed last year, our country's inflation rate is now lower than in the UK, Canada, and 20 other European Union member states.
Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi unleashed a record inflation crisis on the American people that has decimated their bank and retirement accounts, increased gas prices to record levels, raised utility bills, drove up grocery costs, and made it harder to live.
I rise today to speak against H.R. 347, the quote-unquote Rein-in Inflation Act, and I'll start my remarks today by saying how ironic it is that we spent, and Republicans spent, the entire first week of this session entangled in a fight in order for them to get the votes to secure a Speaker of the House, and the whole crux of that entanglement was, and part of it, was rules to maintain regular order in the House. Rules to maintain regular order. Because just as we go back to Schoolhouse Rock, you introduce a bill, it's supposed to go to committee, you get a markup on that committee, a hearing in that committee, a vote in that committee, and if that bill can survive a committee vote, it comes right here to the floor of this House. And we spent a whole week tied up in the beginning of this term, trying to reassert that order. And then, today, one of the first acts that we have from this oversight committee is to subvert that, because perhaps they knew that this would not survive their own committee, and so it goes straight to the floor for a vote, subverting all of those arguments that Republicans were making about restoring order to this House. But let's get into the substance of this bill. Ironically, if they had gone into this order, if they had gone through regular order, they may have caught that this bill does nothing to rein in inflation, in part because in their haste to put it together, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle committed an incredibly basic drafting error that makes this bill completely unenforceable. Even if we agreed on their ends, the haste and the rush to put this together and skip committee has created a drafting error that doesn't even make this bill enforceable. But even putting that error aside, my colleagues and I seem to have wildly different definitions of what actually is considered inflationary. While Republicans have labeled virtually any federal spending during the pandemic as inflationary, while railing against the child tax credit that helped babies continue to be fed and diapers on their bottoms, that help families stitch things together, while they've railed against the eviction moratoriums and the Paycheck Protection Act, Moody's Analytics found that the American Rescue Plan prevented this country from slipping into a double-digit recession. Because of the American Rescue Plan and the actual Inflation Reduction Act that Democrats passed last year, our country's inflation rate is now lower than in the UK, Canada, and 20 other European Union member states. Yet Republicans have introduced legislation to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which would immediately raise the price of insulin along with other critical prescription drugs. Tell me how that is fighting inflation when they're proposing to raise the costs of prescriptions. Not only did Republicans vote to raise prices on prescription drugs, but they also voted against measures to drive down the price of gasoline last year. Last year, Democrats presented a bill to penalize companies who were price gouging during the middle of Putin's war on Ukraine. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted against that too. So which one is it? Republicans have controlled this body for almost 2 months and have not passed a single bill that would actually address inflation or cut costs from working families. But you know what Democrats did? In January, we capped the price of insulin at $35 so that everyday working families can actually get a little bit more ahead. And we have a lot more to go. But we don't even see a carefulness and a thoughtfulness from the other side of the aisle to even draft the language in this bill properly. It's not even ready for a vote. So why should we? And for that reason, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the so-called Rein-in Inflation Act. And with that, I yield to the distinguished gentlewoman of St. Louis, Cori Bush.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in favor of H.R. 347, the Rein-In Act. And I do think that it is very rich that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are talking about regular order all of a sudden. My first 2 years in Congress, there was no such thing as regular order. In fact, I served on the Budget Committee, and we passed 2 budget reconciliations on the House floor. They passed 2 budget reconciliations on the House floor without it going through committee, completely bypassed committee. First one was $1.9 trillion. The next one, $700 billion. And, really all it was the Green New Deal. Just real quick, hurry up, get it to the floor. We got to spend trillions and trillions of dollars and hurt as many Americans as possible in the 2 years that we have left in power. With this Rein-In Act, this bill will hold Joe Biden accountable for his reckless spending that he's approved by my Democrat colleagues who hastily sent all of these bills to him, rushing him to spend trillions and trillions of American taxpayer dollars. His reckless spending will now be required. His administration will be required to publish the inflationary impact of executive orders before enacting them. My constituents are struggling to deal with disastrous effects of Bidenflation. Under 2 years of one-party rule, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi unleashed a record inflation crisis on the American people that has decimated their bank and retirement accounts, increased gas prices to record levels, raised utility bills, drove up grocery costs, and made it harder to live for the people in my district, Colorado's 3rd district, and all throughout this great country. The primary root cause of this record-breaking inflation was trillions of dollars of wasteful federal spending. In Joe Biden's first year in office alone, he issued more executive orders than any other president in my lifetime, costing taxpayers more than $1 trillion. The American people said loud and clear last November that enough is enough. They have empowered this new majority to demand transparency by revealing just how much Biden's executive orders are costing American families and small businesses. I want to thank my colleague and chairwoman of the Republican Conference, Elise Stefanik, for her work to hold Joe Biden and his administration accountable. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor for the underlying bill. And with that, I yield back.